Of the boats we have built, the no man's land boat has the most interesting lines and molds that you build around. The boat has an easy motion and feels much larger than it actually is. I'm going to read you the description that Howard Chapelle made in his book American Small Sailing Craft of the no man's land boat. Beach boats have been mentioned as being of the New England boat model. These were the small two-masted double-enders once used on the south side of Cape Cod in the immediate vicinity of Vineyard Sound. The type name usually applied to these craft was no man's land boats, as many were once employed at a fishing camp on that island. Properly, perhaps, the boats might better be called Vineyard Sound boats, as they were used on Martha's Vineyard on Nantucket Island and on the Cape shore of the Sound. The history of the type is unknown, but there are the usual statements that the boats were descendants of whaleboats, statements which are unsupported by any argument or evidence. The type was in use as early as 1856 at least. The boats were small as a rule. The popular size is about 17 or 18 feet long. In the past years of the type, the boats were built up to 24 feet in length, and it is said at Martha's Vineyard that this was accomplished by changing the scale on the half models used in laying down the boats. The boats were all originally keelcraft, and a model of one in the watercraft collection is of this design. About 1886, the centerboard came into use. This seems to have been brought about by the necessity of the boats going further away from home to fish, which was also responsible, no doubt, for the increase in size mentioned. The evidence regarding the centerboard bolts is based on a number of half models and 3 hulks that have been measured, as well as descriptions from various sources. It appears that the boats were commonly built at Martha's Vineyard, New Bedford, Fairhaven, and along the Cape shore of Vineyard Sound. The boats were also built at Providence, Rhode Island. The models used were varied to some extent, and the boats became stock models with such builders as Delano's and the Beetles in New Bedford, Fairhaven section. They were all open and were fairly lightly built of cedar and oak. Some builders used bent frames, but others preferred single-sawn frames of cedar root. All the boats were lapstrake and copper fastened. An iron strap protected the keel in beaching. Figure 62 is a drawing of an old boat found on Martha's Vineyard, which was said to have been built by Delano, to be one of 2 surviving boats by this builder in 1941. The hull somewhat resembles the rigged model in the watercraft collection, and the rig shown here is taken from that model. The hull is of conventional lapstrake construction, which requires no comment. The rig is 2 loose-footed sprit sails of small area with light spars readily unshipped and stowed in the boat. The foresail is the larger of the 2. The mainsail has a club on its foot, and as in the Cape Ann Dory and the Manticus boat. In the 1890s, when beach boats were going out of use, other rigs were used, for example, gaff foresail or gaff mainsail, with the mainsail sometimes fitted with a boom. At this period, some of the larger boats were half-decked, but these were not used on the beaches, of course. The beach boats were particularly designed, built, and fitted to be launched from an open beach and to beach on return. They usually worked from a fixed location, and it was common for a number of boats to work together so that the crews could help one another in the beach work. One of the important requisites of a beach boat is lightness. Another is ability to work under oars. Sailing qualities were desired in the no man's land boats because they had to sail some distance to the fishing grounds. The result of conflicting requirements can be seen in the plans. The double-ended boats were thought best in this section for beach work, but the opinion was not universal. The ballast employed in the no man's land boats was in the form of sandbags, which could be filled or emptied as conditions required. Figure 63 shows the lines of a Beetle-built boat, somewhat more powerful than the Delano boat. This drawing also shows a common method of hanging the centerboard in these beach boats. This permitted rapid removal of the board from its case when ready to beach. There were a number of methods of accomplishing this, most of which used what were called patent hangers, and the American surf boats were often fitted with these when sail was employed in such craft. The no man's land boats commonly had the centerboard slot in one of the garboards rather than on the center line of the hull and through the keel. The offside position was used because this avoided the slot becoming jammed with small stones or dirt through contact with the beach in landing. The no man's land boats had an excellent reputation for safety and were very good sailors. They were never as large and powerful as the regular surf boats, such as those of Menominee and Cape Race types. Beach work, as carried on by the fishermen, was an art and could be learned only by long experience under trained supervision. It was never a single-handed operation, of course. The beach gear used with these boats should be described as it would be useful for many other purposes. The boats were hauled and launched on ladders. These were made in short sections, hooked together end to end. Each section consisted of two timbers laid parallel, joined together by a series of wooden rollers like rungs of a ladder. The rollers were often only a foot or so long. 2 or 3 spreaders of iron rod and pipe were also used in each section to prevent the side timbers from binding the rollers. Iron hooks and strap stirrups at the ends of the sections served to join them. Sleepers secured to the underside of the side timbers prevented them from sinking into the sand beach. The sections were often laid out into the water and staked there when the boats were ready to come in. The ladders thus formed a simple marine railway. The boats were moved by placing their keels on the rollers and then with the beach crew holding them upright by the gunwales. The boats were easily launched or hauled. The fall of the beach to the water was a help in launching, of course. Holes at each end of the keel were used for hauling lines. A turntable was sometimes used. This was a plank platform on which was a pivoted block shaped to take the keel of a boat. The boat was worked off the rollers onto this, turned end for end, and then worked back onto the ladder. Capstans were not used, but at Block Island, where large beach boats were once used, horses and oxen aided in the beach work. The launching cart used by life-saving stations does not appear to have been employed by fishermen. Of the drawings we ordered from the Smithsonian, besides Howard Chapelle's, we also ordered a few from Robert H. Baker, otherwise known as Bob Baker. I'd like to read a little bit from the book that his wife wrote after his death. The title of it is Robert H. Baker, A Legacy of Smallcraft by Ann W. Baker. A Legacy of Smallcraft is the story of a man's life as seen through the eyes of a woman who loved and admired him. The man is Robert H. Baker, 1927 to 1983, known to most as Bob. The woman is Ann W. Baker, 1929 to 2011, known to most as Pete, but called Petey only by her closest friends. And the final bit was, the book was finished by their youngest child, Sarah. I will be reading from a chapter titled A Love Affair from A Legacy of a Small Craft. While designing and teaching and building small boats at St. George's School, Bob's deeper interests were in the working man's boat. An opportunity to further his interest arrived when he took a break from the school to get married. Bob and his bride Anna had chosen to honeymoon on Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, an out-of-the-way island that Bob also knew would be an excellent place to look for working men's fishing boats. Bob had an innate sense for scouting out working boats. While poking around Menimsha, pardon my pronunciation, the tiny harbor at the west end of the vineyard, he found a maritime rarity and became involved in a second love affair. Her name was Orca. Built in 1882, she was a no man's land boat A boat steeped in tradition and all but a vanished breed. The no man's land boats were named after the same small island 5 miles south of Martha's Vineyard where Bob had previously cruised. Because No Man's Land Island was close to the fishing grounds, it soon became the summer home for many of the vineyard's fishermen and their families. During the Second World War, No Man's Land Island was seized by the government for use as target practice, and the families were forced to leave. Even today, parts of the island are off limits due to the possibility of unexploded bombs. The No Man's Land boats were open, two-masted double-enders averaging 17 to 20 feet in length. Originally built as keel boats, by 1886 centerboards had been installed. Built with cedar and oak, the early boats were lapstrake, but as time passed they were more often carvel planked. The sails were two loose-footed sprit sails. The spars were light and easily stowed in the boat when rowing. Not only had the No Man's Land boats been developed for work in the same waters that Bob had lived beside and learned from, but he also knew their seaworthiness was well proven. 2 weeks later, Bob and Orca left Menempsea with her bow pointed home on the long reach across Buzzards Bay to Westport Point. Orca had been a true working man's boat with all the marks of her history etched in her hull. Bob studied each mark to understand how she had been used. He studied her construction and researched her history. He measured her, drew her lines, drew 3 perspective views of her hull to better understand her shape, and then compared her lines to existing No Man's Land half models on display at Mystic Seaport Museum. Before Bob started restoring Orca, he made many inquiries about her history and her original rig. He wrote to Onslow S. Robinson, whose grandfather first owned the boat. When Bob received a reply from Robinson, Orca's history, construction, and rig were confirmed. It gives me great pleasure to know that my grandfather's boat has passed into the hands of one who appreciates her historical value. Orca was built for my grandfather, Onslow Stewart, about 1882. I believe he entered a small boat fishing and lobstering shortly after he gave up whaling in 1850. The hull was built by Delano at the Beetle Yard in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. She was smooth planked instead of clinker built, and an indication of later construction. Grandfather took the hull home to his place in Chilmark, where he had a hinged partition between his barn and workshop so he could bring a boat as large as Orca through the barn doors and partly into the shop. There he installed the seats, deck, wash rail, and all the interior fittings to complete the boat. The centerboard went alongside the keel. I believe it was on the starboard side. The fish well was unequally divided by the centerboard. The keel was quite narrow and had an keel iron about a foot square to facilitate hauling the boat up on skid ladders using oxen, as was done at No Man's Land and at Lobsterville, Menempsea. The oxen were hitched by short, heavy ropes and shackled to the pulling hole low on the stern. I believe you will find the forward mast band set in a heavily kneed piece still intact. The stern post has been replaced, now heavier than original. The forward sail was a relatively large gaff type without boom, but frequently with club, a short 30-inch piece of wood to which the sheet was attached. The aftersail was of the sprit type, probably without a boom, in order to facilitate furling, as this mast and sail was frequently unstepped, either during a stiff breeze or during a calm when rowing became necessary. I last used the boat in 1920, Onslow S. Robinson. Finally, when Bob felt he knew her inside out, he set about restoring her. Because Orca had been modified over the years, Bob carefully searched out old notches and holes in her construction in order to restore her centerboard case and thwarts to their original position. The position for one thwart eluded him, but not wanting to assume its location, he left it out. Onslow Robinson's description of Orca's rig raised some questions for Bob. He had learned from his research that the islanders considered the boats to be schooners with foresail and main. The foremast and main were spritsail rigged with the club on the main or aftersail. Chances are, Bob wrote, that the club got innovated about the second time the fellow on the after end got clobbered with the main boom. Bob experimented with Orca's rig and came up with a version that, while it may not be completely original, worked well. The snotters for the sprit had double eyes and were long enough to allow the sprit to swing. Though the island people used a single sheet on the foresail, Bob rigged it double for single-handing. He set up a main sheet horse, too, for a better lead and to get the sheet out of the way of the tiller. Working boats, Bob felt, should have their sailing performance judged with their intended task in mind. They were tools designed for a certain purpose. Orca sails well, Bob wrote, but cannot be driven with her rail down or she will die. When you put the helm down, she will go where you point her and not get hung up in the middle. The old horse handles just as she should, slowly but steadily. We launched our version of the No Man's Land boat back in 2012. We built it out of cypress strips, and as is often true, we really regret having sold it. It was a really comfortable boat to sail. It wasn't any racehorse, but it always got you there and got you back.